Picture this: a single illustration, sketched in ink and color centuries ago, sitting quietly in a manuscript. It seems harmless, just another medieval artwork. But what if I told you this one image rewrote history itself? For hundreds of years, scholars, rulers, and even everyday people accepted it as truth. It shaped wars, influenced kings, and distorted our understanding of an entire era. And the wildest part, no one questioned it until now. This is the story of how art became weaponized in the Middle Ages, not with swords or sieges, but with brushes and parchment. In a time when most couldn't read, images were power. They told people who to fear, who to worship, and even who to obey. And sometimes they lied. The illustration we're about to uncover wasn't just a pretty picture. It was propaganda, carefully crafted to bend reality to fit someone's agenda. Think of it as the medieval version of fake news, but with consequences that echoed for generations. So how did a mere drawing manage to fool so many for so long? And what does its discovery mean for us today? Over the next few minutes, we'll peel back the layers of this centuries-old deception. We'll follow the trail of clues left by historians, decode the hidden messages in the art itself, and reveal how one lie reshaped everything from religious conflicts to national identities. This isn't just a tale about the past, it's a warning about how easily what we see can shape what we believe. Ready to uncover the truth? Let's begin. In the Middle Ages, books weren't just for reading, they were weapons of influence. Imagine a world where most people couldn't decipher a single written word. For the vast majority, illustrations weren't decorations. They were the news, the textbooks, even the propaganda of their time. Kings, popes, and warlords knew this better than anyone. They poured fortunes into lavish manuscripts, filling them with images that told very specific stories, their stories. Take the Bayeux Tapestry, that 70-meter-long embroidered epic of the Norman conquest. It wasn't just a record of history. It was a victory lap stitched in thread, designed to make William the Conqueror's invasion look like destiny itself. The losers, barely an afterthought. But what happens when this power isn't just bending the truth, it's erasing it entirely? That's where our infamous illustration comes in. Hidden in a prayer book or chronicle, it seemed innocent enough, a scene of a crowned figure receiving a blessing, or perhaps a battle where one side looked righteous, the other monstrous. The artist wasn't just sketching, they were scripting reality. And because no one could fact-check it, no newspapers, no internet, just the word of those who held the pens, the lie took root. Generations grew up believing it, wars were fought over it, treaties cited it as proof. The real kicker, the people who commissioned it knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't just preserving history, they were inventing it. This wasn't just about flattery or spin. These images reshaped borders, justified invasions, even turned saints into villains. A single scene could damn a dynasty or sanctify a tyrant. And the scariest part, it worked because no one thought to question a picture. After all, seeing is believing, even when what you're seeing is a carefully crafted fiction. So when we finally unravel this one deceptive illustration, we're not just correcting the record, we're exposing how easily a stroke of paint can rewrite the world. The illustration that fooled Europe for centuries began as a modest commission, a single page in a religious manuscript created in the workshop of a Flemish master around the year 1400. At first glance, it followed all the conventions of medieval art: rich blues and golds, intricate borders crawling with vines, and a central scene that seemed to confirm everything people already believed. The subject, a dramatic meeting between two kings, one kneeling in submission, the other radiating divine authority. The artist rendered every detail with such precision, from the embroidery on their robes to the expressions of their courtiers, that no one thought to doubt its authenticity. But here's the catch: that meeting never happened. The genius of the forgery lay in its plausibility. The artist didn't invent a new history, they twisted a real one. The kneeling figure was an actual ruler, but he'd never surrendered to the man portrayed as his conqueror. The scene borrowed just enough truth to feel credible, mixing real heraldry, accurate costumes, and even authentic locations. And the patron, a duke whose family stood to gain everything if this version of events became accepted history. He didn't just want the manuscript for his library, he needed it as proof in a land dispute that had dragged on for decades. The moment the ink dried, this illustration wasn't art, it was a legal document in disguise. What made the lie so convincing wasn't just the skill of its creator, but the world it entered. In an era before photography, before mass printing, images like this were rare and expensive. Only the wealthy and powerful could commission them, so who would dare question their accuracy? When a duke displayed this manuscript to visiting ambassadors, or when monks copied it into new books, the false scene gained legitimacy through sheer repetition. By the time it reached its third generation of viewers, the story had hardened into fact. Kings cited it during negotiations, scholars referenced it in chronicles, and rival families found themselves on the wrong side of a history that had been rewritten with a paintbrush. The most dangerous lies are the ones that serve someone's purpose. This image didn't just spread, it thrived because it gave rulers what they craved, proof that their power was ordained, their rivals illegitimate, their wars justified. And with every hand that copied it, every voice that repeated its story, the truth slipped further away. By the time anyone thought to ask questions, the lie had already built castles, crowned kings, and redrawn maps. It wasn't just a fake, it was the foundation of a new reality. The scene depicted in the illustration was dramatic and decisive, a moment that supposedly changed the course of European history. It showed the surrender of King Henry of Lorraine to Duke Philip of Burgundy in the year 1424, a humiliation that cemented Burgundy's dominance over the region. Henry kneels in the mud, his crown offered in submission, while Philip stands triumphant, bathed in celestial light as if God himself endorsed his victory. The message was clear: this wasn't just politics, it was divine will. But here's the problem: Henry never surrendered. Contemporary chronicles tell a very different story. Letters from Henry's own court reveal he was under siege, yes, but he negotiated a truce, not a surrender. The two rulers met as equals, exchanging pledges of peace, not submission. Even Burgundy's own military records, buried in archives for centuries, admit the conflict ended in a stalemate. So why did the artist rewrite history? Because Philip needed a myth, not the messy truth. His dynasty was young, his claim to Lorraine shaky. A fabricated scene of total victory gave him the legitimacy he craved, proof that his rule wasn't just accepted, but inevitable. The lie's consequences were staggering. When Philip's descendants used the illustration to justify annexing Lorraine's lands, they pointed to this moment as evidence of their divine right. The image became a legal weapon, cited in treaties and inheritance disputes for generations. Meanwhile, Henry's lineage was systematically erased from official records, painted as traitors in textbooks and sermons. By the time archaeologists uncovered the original siege site in the 1800s, finding no evidence of a grand surrender, only the remnants of a negotiated withdrawal, the false narrative had already shaped borders, laws, and even national identities. What's chilling is how easily the lie spread, without photography or mass media who could disprove it. The few who knew the truth, Henry's allies, skeptical monks, were silenced or ignored. The illustration was copied into prayer books, woven into tapestries, even carved into cathedral walls. Each reproduction lent it more authority until the fiction became unshakable fact. And that's the danger of a single, well-placed lie. It doesn't just distort the past, it builds a new world on top of it. The lie didn't just stay trapped in one manuscript, it multiplied. Like a virus, the illustration spread through the most powerful networks of the medieval world: monastic scriptoria, royal workshops, even the mints that stamped coins. Every time it was copied, the falsehood gained new authority. Picture a monk hunched over a parchment in a chilly scriptorium, painstakingly recreating the scene. His job wasn't to question history, it was to preserve it, so he inked every detail: Henry's bowed head, Philip's triumphant stance, without realizing he was etching a fiction into permanence. And with each new copy, the lie traveled further, from the Duke's court to distant abbeys, where other scribes folded it into their own chronicles. The variations were subtle but telling. In one version, Henry's crown wasn't just offered, it was trampled under Philip's boot. Another added angels hovering above Philip, their hands blessing his victory. These weren't accidents, they were deliberate amplifications, each tweak making the lie grander, more divine. Even coins got in on the act. Philip's minters struck silver pieces bearing the scene, ensuring every merchant and peasant handling them absorbed the message: resistance was futile. The image became shorthand for Burgundian supremacy, repeated so often that questioning it felt like doubting the sunrise. Why did no one speak up? Part of it was fear: crossing a duke could cost you your head. But more insidiously, the lie benefited too many people. Monks gained patronage for copying devotional texts that flattered their patrons. Nobles citing the image in land disputes found judges suddenly sympathetic. Even rival rulers who might have known the truth stayed silent because they were busy crafting their own myths. The few who dared whisper doubts were drowned out by the weight of repetition. After all, when you've seen the same story in a dozen books, a tapestry, and your own coin purse, it's easier to believe than to rebel. The most dangerous lies aren't the ones shouted from rooftops, they're the ones whispered in every corner until they sound like common sense. By the time scholars finally pieced together the truth, the illustration had done its work. It wasn't just a drawing anymore, it was history itself. And that's the irony. The very systems meant to preserve knowledge, scriptoria, chronicles, even currency, became the tools that locked a lie in place for centuries. The truth never stood a chance. In the shadow of that infamous illustration, dissent wasn't just discouraged, it was erased. Manuscripts containing contradictory accounts mysteriously vanished from monastery libraries, their pages torn out or reduced to ash. Scholars who dared question the scene's authenticity found themselves exiled to remote abbeys, their reputations smeared as troublemakers or heretics. One chronicler, a monk named Alaric, wrote a meticulous rebuttal tracing the meeting's true timeline, only to have his work confiscated and his cell ransacked. His final entry, scribbled in the margins of a psalm book, reads, "They burn the truth and call it piety." The suppression wasn't always violent, sometimes it was bureaucratic. When a noblewoman named Helena de Montfort petitioned the papal court to correct the record, citing her family's archives as proof, her documents were lost en route to Rome. The Duke's agents quietly bribed notaries to alter land deeds, making the false scene the legal basis for disputes. Even witnesses who'd been present at the real meeting, knights, servants, diplomats, were discredited as drunkards or fools. One aging soldier who testified that Philip and Henry had parted as equals was paraded through town in a fool's cap while heralds mocked his failing memory. The message was clear: challenge the narrative, and you wouldn't just lose your voice, you'd lose your place in the world. The parallels to modern censorship are unsettling. Today, we see history weaponized in similar ways: archives restricted, dissenting voices drowned out by algorithms, inconvenient facts dismissed as fake news. The tools have changed, but the playbook remains the same: control the story, and you control the future. Back then, the Duke's lie didn't just rewrite the past, it dictated alliances for generations. Kings who might have allied with Lorraine's heirs instead shunned them, fearing association with defeated bloodlines. Marriages were cancelled, trade routes redirected, even saints' cults suppressed, all because a single image told the world who mattered and who didn't. Power doesn't just create lies, it builds ecosystems where those lies can thrive. By the time the truth began to resurface, the political landscape had already hardened around the fiction. Alliances had been forged, borders drawn, dynasties risen and fallen, all on the foundation of a scene that never happened. And that's the cruelest trick of all. By the time the lie is exposed, it's already rewritten the world in its image. The ripple effects of that single forged illustration stretched far beyond Burgundy's borders, twisting alliances like vines around a crumbling wall. Take the Treaty of Erasure in 1435, a pact that should have been a straightforward peace between France and Burgundy. Instead, negotiators brandished the fake surrender scene as proof of Burgundy's historic right to Lorraine's territories. French diplomats, though skeptical, couldn't risk opposing what appeared to be centuries of divine precedent. The treaty's ink hadn't even dried before Burgundy used it to strong-arm smaller states into submission, waving the illustration like a legal writ. One Flemish ambassador wrote home in frustration, "We argue with parchment ghosts." The lie didn't just justify land grabs, it fabricated enemies. When the Duke of Savoy sought an alliance with Burgundy against Milan, his counselors pointed to the kneeling King Henry as a cautionary tale. See how resistance ends. Never mind that Savoy and Milan had traded peacefully for generations. The manufactured narrative of inevitable Burgundian supremacy made defiance seem suicidal. Meanwhile, Lorraine's true allies, Aragon and Brittany, found themselves isolated. Their envoys were snubbed at courts, their trade routes quietly diverted. A Breton chronicle lamented, "We are punished not for our deeds, but for a lie painted in another man's book." Realpolitik festered beneath these theatrical pretexts. While Burgundy's dukes preached divine destiny, their ledgers told a cruder story. Tax records reveal how seized Lorraine mines bankrolled their wars, while penance payments from supposedly defeated towns funded velvet-draped palaces. The economic toll on misrepresented regions was staggering. Lorraine's once thriving wool trade collapsed after the illustration tarred its merchants as traitors' kin, leaving markets in Bruges and Antwerp to monopolize the industry. A guildmaster's plea survives in the Strasbourg archives. "They starve us with a brushstroke." Perhaps the cruelest twist was how the lie outlived its creators. By the 1600s, the illustration had been cited in everything from inheritance lawsuits to sermons on obedience. Habsburg emperors displayed copies when annexing Burgundian lands, while French revolutionaries later used it to justify dismantling feudal myths, never realizing they were attacking one fabrication with another. The art that began as a duke's vanity project had become a self-replicating weapon, bending each new era to its will, and all because no one thought to ask who benefits when history is for sale. The lie didn't just rewrite history, it rerouted gold. Across Europe, the false illustration's ripple effects warped economies like a magnet tugging at compass needles. Take the bustling port of Antwerp, where Burgundy's fabricated victory sent fortunes soaring. With Lorraine's merchants branded as traitors, their goods were slapped with punitive tariffs, some as high as 30%. Overnight, Antwerp's docks overflowed with wool and timber that once flowed through Lorraine's markets. Guild ledgers from the period show Antwerp's trade volume doubling within a decade, while tax records from Metz, once Lorraine's commercial hub, reveal a staggering drop. One despairing trader scribbled in his account book, "They tax our carts empty and call it justice." But the economic sabotage went deeper. Silver mines in the Vosges Mountains, controlled by Lorraine's nobility for generations, were reassigned to Burgundian lords who cited the illustration as proof of ownership. Production quotas surged under brutal new overseers, while profits bypassed local towns entirely. A monk's diary from the region describes villages emptied of men, drafted into the mines. They dig their own graves in the rock. Meanwhile, Burgundy funneled the stolen silver into loans to the Holy Roman Emperor, securing preferential trade deals that choked Lorraine's remaining industries. The lie had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. By strangling Lorraine's economy, Burgundy made its depiction as a defeated territory seem factual. Cities that thrived were just as revealing. Bruges, already a financial powerhouse, became the epicenter of a redistributed trade network. Its burghers erected a new guild hall with a frieze copying the infamous illustration, as if to remind visitors where power now resided. The city's moneylenders grew fat on loans to Burgundy's allies, charging higher interest to those deemed risky by association with Lorraine. A surviving ledger from a Bruges bank lists a loan to a Savoyard count with the chilling footnote, "Collateral, claims on former Lorraine lands." The financial system had absorbed the lie, turning parchment fiction into hard currency. The cruelest twist, some of the biggest victims weren't even in Lorraine. The Italian city-state of Lucca, famed for its silk, had traded freely with Lorraine's weavers for a century. When Burgundy blacklisted Lorraine as a hostile entity, Lucca's merchants found their caravans blocked at Alpine passes, their contracts voided overnight. Bankruptcy rolls from the period show 80 Lucchese silk houses shuttering within 5 years, their artisans fleeing to rival Venice. A silk merchant's plea to the Doge survives in the Venetian archives. "They kill us with a lie we never even heard." These weren't just economic shifts, they were social earthquakes. As wealth concentrated in Burgundy's orbit, the gap between privileged cities and marginalized regions bred unrest. In Strasbourg, weavers thrown out of work by the trade embargoes formed secret societies, their manifestos invoking the true history suppressed by the dukes. Tax revolts erupted in the Rhine Valley, where peasants burned effigies of the kneeling King Henry, shouting, "We never bowed," but the most telling resistance was silent. Customs records show a thriving black market along the forbidden Lorraine borders, where traders exchanged goods without tariffs or ledgers. One seized shipment contained Flemish wool hidden beneath sacks of grain, and beneath that, a carefully folded drawing of the real meeting between Henry and Philip, crudely copied from an eyewitness account. Even in the shadows, the truth refused to die. The economic scars outlasted the lie itself. When archaeologists excavated a Lorraine market square in the 1920s, they found layers of charred grain dating to the Burgundian embargo, proof of deliberate famines. Meanwhile, Antwerp's modern stock exchange stands on the site of its medieval trading hall, its wealth still echoing a deception from 600 years ago. That's the insidious power of a lie with economic teeth. It doesn't just change who wins or loses, it rewires the entire system, bending reality until the fiction feels inevitable. And by the time the ledger books are corrected, generations have already paid the price in emptied coffers and broken lives. The illustration didn't just rewrite politics, it codified cruelty into the social order. Look closely at the margins of that infamous scene, and you'll spot the real victims, peasants toiling happily in the background, their faces blank with contentment as armored knights tower over them. These weren't just decorative flourishes, they were propaganda designed to hammer home a brutal message: some people are born to kneel. The artist knew exactly what they were doing. By depicting serfs as cheerful in their drudgery, the image normalized back-breaking labor as divine will. A monk copying the manuscript in Cologne added his own twist, sketching a peasant who literally smiled while plowing, a visual gag that made subjugation seem voluntary. Religious minorities fared even worse. In later versions, artists slipped in grotesque figures lurking at the scene's edges, hook-nosed caricatures whispering in Henry's ear, or wild-eyed heretics gnashing their teeth at Philip's triumph. These weren't random doodles. They tied political dissent to heresy, making rebellion not just treasonous but sinful. When Burgundy's Inquisition rounded up Waldensian preachers in the 1450s, prosecutors waved the illustration in court, claiming it proved dissenters had always conspired with traitors. One terrified weaver, interrogated about his faith, reportedly stammered, "If the books say it, how can it be false?" The psychological toll was devastating. Imagine being a Lorraine peasant, taught from childhood that your ancestors deserved their defeat. Church murals echoed the manuscript's lies. Stained glass windows cast Burgundian lords in celestial light. Even playground rhymes twisted history. Children in Metz sang about King Henry the Kneeler while skipping rope. Generations internalized their own inferiority, believing resistance was as pointless as cursing the rain. Tax records show Lorraine's villagers consistently underreported harvests, as if expecting punishment was inevitable. A priest's diary from the era confesses, "They give their last loaf freely, convinced God wills it." But the most corrosive effect was how the lie poisoned solidarity. When famine hit the Rhine Valley in 1482, Lorraine's starving peasants didn't blame Burgundy. They turned on each other, accusing neighbors of hoarding, like the traitor king. Witch trials spiked in regions where the illustration circulated most, as communities hunted scapegoats for their misery. The real tragedy: Burgundy's own harvests were failing, but their artists simply painted new scenes of bountiful ducal granaries. The fiction didn't just justify inequality, it kept the hungry from seeing who truly stole their bread. This wasn't medieval spin. It was social engineering with brushstrokes, conditioning people to accept their chains as ornaments. And when religious wars erupted, that conditioning turned lethal. The same tactics used to vilify Lorraine's nobility were repurposed to demonize Protestants, Jews, and reformers, their faces now grafted onto Henry's in pamphlets and broadsheets. A single lie copied across centuries became a blueprint for persecution. The parchment might yellow, but the poison stayed fresh. The lie didn't just reshape politics, it became scripture. By the mid-1500s, the infamous illustration had slithered its way into religious texts, its twisted narrative repurposed as divine proof. In one chilling adaptation, a Burgundian monk redrew the scene for a psalter, adding a golden halo above Duke Philip's head while shadowy figures labeled heretics whispered into King Henry's ear. The message was unmistakable. Opposing Burgundy wasn't just treason, it was blasphemy. Copies of this corrupted psalter circulated in monasteries from Paris to Prague, their pages used to justify everything from increased tithes to outright violence. A Franciscan preacher in Cologne thundered from the pulpit, "See how God smites the faithless," pointing directly at the forged image behind him. Congregants left clutching woodcut copies, their fear of divine wrath now tied to a lie. The Vatican unwittingly amplified the fraud when Pope Pius II issued a bull condemning Lorraine's perfidy during a dispute over monastery lands. His legates cited the illustration as evidence. Never mind that the Vatican's own archives contained letters from Henry's chaplain describing the real meeting. The papal court relied on the more accessible version, the one painted on church walls and embroidered into altar cloths. Soon, bishops in Burgundy-controlled territories mandated the image display in every parish, turning it into a test of orthodoxy. In Strasbourg, a priest who refused to preach from the corrupted Psalter was defrocked for harboring sympathy with the defeated. His replacement hung a tapestry of the scene above the baptismal font, ensuring even newborns were steeped in the fiction. Crusaders carried the lie like a banner. During the brutal suppression of the Hussite revolt, Burgundian knights wore tunics embroidered with the scene of Henry's surrender, framing their slaughter as holy work. Chroniclers recorded how entire villages in Bohemia were torched while soldiers shouted, "Remember Lorraine," a battle cry for a lie. The illustration's power grew with each atrocity. When inquisitors in Toulouse tried a group of Waldensians for heresy in 1492, prosecutors entered the courtroom holding an enlarged copy of the image. The accused, many illiterate, were forced to kneel before it as proof of their sect's historical treachery. One victim's final words, scribbled on his cell wall, survive: "They judge us by a painter's jest." The most enduring scars were left on Jewish communities. As anti-Semitism flared across Europe, artists began inserting grotesque caricatures into the margins of the illustration, hook-nosed figures counting coins at Henry's feet, or dressed as Burgundian nobles to expose their secret control. These vile tropes migrated to pamphlets and passion plays, fueling pogroms from Mainz to Krakow. In 1486, when the town of Regensburg expelled its Jewish population, the decree explicitly referenced the proof found in the Sacred Chronicles of Burgundy. The lie had metastasized, its original political purpose eclipsed by raw hatred. How did this deception outlive its creators? Because the truth was no match for spectacle. The illustration was performed in mystery plays, carved into choir stalls, even reenacted at royal weddings. Each iteration sanded away more of reality, until the lie felt older than history itself. By the time a Spanish humanist named Rodrigo de Cepeda rediscovered the original accounts in the 1520s, his findings were dismissed as bookish fantasies. The illustration had become more than art, it was memory itself, woven into the fabric of faith. And that's the darkest magic of propaganda. When the lie is beautiful enough, people will defend it like a relic. Generations of scholars never questioned what stared back at them from the page. By the Renaissance, the forged illustration had seeped into the bedrock of European education, its falsehoods repeated with the reverence of gospel. Take the esteemed historian Jacques de Brézé, whose 1526 chronicle The Triumph of Burgundy became required reading for nobility across the continent. He devoted 12 lavish pages to describing the surrender scene in meticulous detail, the angle of Henry's bowed head, the exact shade of Philip's banner, all based on that single fraudulent image. Never once did he consult Lorraine's surviving court records, gathering dust in a Dijon monastery. Why would he? The lie had already hardened into tradition. Other luminaries amplified the myth. The Florentine diplomat Niccolò Machiavelli, usually so shrewd about power's illusions, cited the illustration in The Prince as proof that victory, once cemented in art, becomes destiny. Dutch cartographer Gerardus Mercator etched the scene into his influential atlas, placing Burgundy's coat of arms triumphantly over Lorraine, a geographic falsehood that would mislead explorers for centuries. Even Erasmus, that great skeptic, parroted the tale in a letter to Thomas More, joking that some kings kneel so well they ought to be saints. The irony was crushing. Europe's brightest minds, so eager to question Aristotle and Ptolemy, swallowed this lie whole. Yet fragments of truth survived in forgotten corners. A Benedictine monk in Trier secretly bound eyewitness accounts into a psalter, hiding them between prayers. A Lorraine blacksmith's daughter, literate against all odds, penned a ballad about the real meeting, its verses passed down orally until folklorists recorded it in the 1800s. Most haunting is the diary of a Burgundian scribe discovered in a Strasbourg attic in 1917. Amid invoices for ink and vellum, he confessed, "His Grace ordered the scene redrawn thrice until the king's knees touched the earth." What we sell as history is but a duke's vanity. These voices were there all along, drowned out by the weight of sanctioned falsehoods. The unraveling began, fittingly, with a bookworm's accident. In 1683, a Leiden librarian named Willem van Houten stumbled upon a discrepancy while cataloguing manuscripts. Two copies of the same chronicle, one from Burgundy, another from Aragon, showed Henry's surrender scene with glaring differences. In the Aragonese version, the kings stood eye to eye, their hands clasped in truce. Van Houten's curiosity spiraled into an obsession. He tracked down merchant logs, weather reports from the meeting day, even a faded sketch by Henry's court artist, all contradicting the official narrative. When he published his findings, the academic world scoffed. A Bordeaux professor dismissed it as a Dutchman's fancy, while Parisian salons mocked his peasant evidence. But the seed of doubt was planted. What's astonishing isn't that the lie persisted, it's how desperately Europe clung to it. Even as Enlightenment thinkers championed reason, they exempted this sacred cow from scrutiny. Voltaire, who ridiculed everything from miracles to monarchy, waved away the controversy with a quip. "Who cares how a king knelt, the throne still stands." The lie had become more than history. It was comfort, identity, a scaffold holding up the social order. To question it meant unraveling everything built upon it: laws, alliances, even national pride. And so the illustration endured, not because people believed it, but because they'd forgotten how to imagine a world without it. The truth, when it finally broke through, came from an unexpected quarter, a 16-year-old archivist's assistant in Vienna. In 1794, Erasure von Hohenberg noticed a date discrepancy in a seized French diplomat's papers. Cross-referencing them with Burgundy's tax records, she proved the surrender occurred while Philip was bedridden with gout, a fact meticulously hidden by his chroniclers. Her report, initially buried in bureaucratic archives, eventually reached a radical young professor named Friedrich Schiller. He'd make it the centerpiece of his blistering lecture, The Tyranny of Painted Lies, igniting a firestorm across Europe's universities. Suddenly, everyone from romantic poets to revolutionary pamphleteers couldn't stop talking about the forgery. After 500 years, the illusion finally cracked, not with a whisper in a library, but with a roar in the streets. Yet the greatest lesson lies in what happened next. As historians rushed to correct the record, they made a chilling discovery: the illustration wasn't unique. Dozens of similar fabrications lurked in Europe's most trusted chronicles, misdated treaties, invented battles, entire dynasties airbrushed from existence. The Burgundian lie was just one thread in a vast tapestry of deception, woven so tightly into history that pulling one thread threatened the whole. And that's the real danger of letting art dictate truth. Once a lie becomes beautiful enough, it doesn't just rewrite the past. It demands the future kneel to its vision. The first cracks in the illustration's armor didn't come from kings or scholars. They came from the quiet corners where outsiders dared to look closer. Take Antonio di Vercelli, a 16th-century antiquarian who spent his days sketching Roman ruins in Burgundy's occupied territories. While cataloguing a crumbling chapel near Metz, he noticed something odd. The architecture in the infamous surrender scene didn't match. The towers depicted had pointed spires, but the actual fortress ruins showed rounded turrets, a style that hadn't appeared until decades after Henry's supposed surrender. Divercelli's sketches, now gathering dust in a Turin archive, bear frantic marginal notes. Did the stones lie, or the painter? But when he shared his findings with a visiting cardinal, he was abruptly reassigned to a monastery in Sardinia. His last letter, smuggled out in a wine barrel, warns, "Truth rusts faster than iron." Then there was Sister Marguerite d'Anjou, a nun-turned-forger with a unique talent. Exiled from her convent for over-curiousness, she supported herself by painting counterfeit miniatures for nobles. One night, while replicating the surrender scene for a wealthy client, her hand froze. The Burgundian standard in the illustration featured a heraldic lion with a raised paw, a detail added only after Philip's grandson won a tournament in 1463, nearly 40 years post-surrender. She cross-checked it with an old armorial roll, her heartbeat loud in the silent scriptorium. The next morning, she slipped a corrected version into her patron's order, showing the proper banner. By sundown, the Duke's guards were at her door. They burned her pigments, broke her brushes, and left her with a warning carved into her writing desk: "God hates a busy hand." These doubters weren't just nitpicking details, they were risking everything. Consider Jan van Hasselt, a Dutch diplomat exiled from Burgundy's court after pointing out that Henry's crown in the illustration matched a design first minted in 1440, not 1424. His reward, a charge of treason and a midnight flight across frozen rivers, his proof sewn into the lining of his cloak. His later letters from England read like spy novels. They'll burn a man faster for correcting a hat than for stealing a throne. What united these rebels wasn't just keen eyes, it was methodology. The rogue monk brother Thibault compared the illustrations' weather to surviving climate records, proving the sunlit surrender occurred during a documented week of torrential rains. A disgraced herald named Florian von Ochs noticed Henry's attendants wore shoes with square toes, a fashion that wouldn't reach Lorraine for another 20 years. These weren't accidents, they were proof of a painting made decades after the fact, retrofitting history like a tailor altering old clothes. The 19th century finally gave these fragments a voice. When archaeologist Emile Dore and excavated Philip's former stronghold in 1832, he found a hidden alcove stuffed with rejected drafts of the illustration, each version bending Henry's posture further downward. But the real smoking gun came from an unexpected place, a child's doodle. In 1859, a librarian in Dijon discovered a grimy prayer book with a crude sketch tucked between its pages. Drawn by Philip's young daughter, it showed two kings shaking hands under a tree, captioned in wobbly letters, "Papa says I mustn't draw the real meeting." The date, 1424. These skeptics didn't just challenge a painting, they exposed how power manufactures truth. Their tools were humble: a nun's paintbrush, a diplomat's cloak, a child's forgotten scrap. But together, they did what armies couldn't. They made the world see that history isn't written by the victors. It's painted by them. And sometimes, all it takes to change everything is someone brave enough to point at the wet ink. The earth never lies. When archaeologists first sank their trowels into the fields near Nancy in 1891, they weren't looking for a conspiracy. They were mapping a medieval drainage system. But the soil told a different story. Beneath layers of peat and pottery shards, they uncovered the remnants of the so-called surrender site from the infamous illustration. No grand fortress, no trampled banners, just the faint outline of a temporary camp with cooking pits still full of charred rabbit bones. The kicker, the camp's layout matched descriptions from Henry's private letters, a peaceful encampment, not a scene of defeat. One digger's journal entry reads, "We found where they ate, not where they kneeled." Then came the skeletons. In 1934, a team working near Dijon exhumed a mass grave supposedly containing Lorraine's fallen traitors from the battle. Forensic analysis revealed the truth. These were plague victims from 30 years later, their bones bearing no weapon marks, but the real bombshell was carbon dating, a then revolutionary technique that placed the grave firmly in the 1450s, shattering the timeline Burgundy's chroniclers had crafted. A Brussels newspaper ran the headline, "Science declares no one died for the Duke's vanity." Archives yielded even darker secrets. When researchers gained access to Philip's private accounts in 1952, they found payments to the original artist buried among laundry lists, to Master Willem for the correction of the king's likeness 12 guilders. The word correction said it all. Nearby, a scribbled note from Philip's steward warned, "Ensure the new version shows the crown touching mud." These weren't commissions, they were bribes meticulously logged alongside orders for wine and tapestries. Yet the lie clung like ivy. Even after the evidence mounted, textbooks well into the 1960s still reproduced the illustration as fact. Why? Because some fictions are too useful to abandon. Belgian schools taught it as proof of national unity, while French curricula used it to justify post-war border claims. At a 1968 symposium, a Luxembourg historian lamented, "We have the bones, the ledgers, the ink tests, but try telling that to 1,000 years of pride." The final irony, the very technology that exposed the fraud also preserved its power. When digitization projects in the 2000s made Burgundy's archives accessible online, the forged illustration went viral, retweeted by nationalists, memed by conspiracy theorists, even featured in a video game soundtrack. Scientists could carbon date parchment, but they couldn't quarantine a catchy lie. As one Oxford professor put it while standing over the empty grave site, "We dug up the truth." Now we have to outlive the myth. Even after historians stripped the illustration bare, exposing its false dates, anachronistic details, and outright fabrications, the lie refused to die. Like a ghost haunting Europe's collective memory, it lingered in school primers, museum placards, even tourist brochures well into the 20th century. Why? Because debunking a myth isn't just about facts, it's about dismantling the stories people build their identities upon. Take the Belgian history textbooks of the 1930s, which still depicted Henry's surrender as a pivotal moment in national unity. When scholars protested, the education minister shrugged. Does it matter if the knee was bent or not? The lesson stands. This wasn't ignorance, it was inertia. The illustration had become shorthand for order, stability, the divine right of rulers. For centuries, it had justified taxes, wars, even marriages. To admit it was fake meant unraveling the moral authority of institutions that had relied on it. A French archivist put it bluntly in 1956, "Telling people their grandfathers fought for a forgery tends to start riots." The lie persisted not because people believed it, but because the alternative, a world built on something as fragile as paint, was too terrifying to face. Modern psychology calls these zombie myths, falsehoods that keep shambling forward long after their brains are shot. Think of the enduring belief that Napoleon was unusually short, he wasn't, or that medieval folks thought the earth was flat, they didn't. These fictions endure because they serve a purpose, simplifying complexity, flattering national pride, or reinforcing social hierarchies. The Burgundian illustration was no different. Even today, fringe groups cite variations of it online, splicing the scene into memes about traditional values or historic defeats. The details blur, but the emotional punch remains proof that a well-crafted lie outlives its creator by centuries. The political utility never faded. During the 2010 debates over European Union subsidies, a Burgundy separatist group circulated posters of the illustration with the caption, "We've been feeding Lorraine for 600 years." Never mind that economists proved the opposite. The image's visceral power trumped spreadsheets. Similarly, when a Lorraine museum tried to mount an exhibit debunking the scene in 2019, protesters picketed with banners reading, "Don't erase our heritage." The irony, their heritage was a Duke's vanity project. What makes these myths so stubborn is their ability to mutate. As the original illustration faded from textbooks, its themes resurfaced in new forms: political cartoons depicting modern leaders as kneeling traitors, or social media graphics twisting historical grievances into memes. The medium changes, but the mechanics stay eerily similar. Reduce complexity to a single gripping image, repeat until it feels inevitable, then weaponize the collective memory. Today's conspiracy theories and deepfakes are just the Burgundian lie with better pixels. The lesson here isn't just about medieval art, it's about the stories we refuse to unlearn. From vaccine myths to revisionist histories, the 21st century is drowning in zombie falsehoods that no amount of fact-checking can kill. Why? Because some lies aren't mistakes, they're choices, and as long as they remain useful, they'll keep walking among us, painted smiles and all. 600 years separate us from that forged medieval illustration, yet its shadow stretches into our digital age like a warning written in light. Today's deepfakes and AI-generated images are just the latest brushes painting over reality tools that can make politicians appear to say words they never uttered, or place civilians in protests they never attended. A viral video from 2021 showed a world leader declaring war in flawless Mandarin, except he'd never spoken a word of it. The clip spread across continents before debunkers could blink, proving how little has changed since Burgundy's dukes realized a lie doesn't need to be perfect, just persuasive enough to outrun the truth. The medieval manuscript and the modern meme share the same DNA. Both exploit our instinct to trust what we see. A 15th century peasant gazing at Henry's fabricated surrender had no way to verify it, just as today's social media user scrolling past a doctored image of a wildfire rarely checks the original source. The difference: speed. Where Burgundy's lie took decades to spread, last year's AI-generated photo of a pope in a puffer jacket circled the globe in hours. Yet the goal remains identical: to shape beliefs by colonizing the imagination. A French disinformation researcher put it bluntly, "The parchment is pixels now, but the playbook is parchment." Some distortions are even more insidious because they mix truth and fiction. Take the shallow fakes that flooded news feeds during recent elections. Genuine videos slowed down to make candidates seem slurring or confused. Like the medieval artist who used real heraldry in his fake surrender scene, these edits weaponize fragments of reality to sell the lie. A Ukrainian journalist tracking such manipulations noticed eerie parallels. They still frame the enemy as both villain and fool, just with better lighting. But here's where history offers hope. Just as Sister Marguerite spotted the anachronistic banner, today's citizen detectives are fighting back with sunlight. Open-source investigators cross-reference satellite images to debunk fake battle footage. High schoolers in Brazil created a browser extension that flags AI-generated faces by their unnaturally perfect teeth. Even museums are joining the fight. The Rijksmuseum recently exhibited the Burgundian forgery beside its modern counterparts, showing visitors how to spot digital brushstrokes in viral images. The real lesson isn't about technology, it's about power. Whether it's a duke commissioning a fake surrender or a troll farm generating fake riots, the motive stays the same: to make you feel small. To whisper that resistance is futile, that the narrative is set. But here's what the forgers never counted on: every lie, no matter how polished, leaves a fracture. A misplaced shadow in a medieval manuscript, a glitching earlobe in an AI portrait, and in that crack, that's where the truth gets in. Now consider this: if artists 6 centuries ago could bend history with goose quills and pigment, what responsibility falls on today's creators? From CGI filmmakers to Instagram influencers, every image maker faces the same choice Philip's painter did: to reflect the world or redefine it. The next time you pick up a phone or a stylus, ask yourself, are you documenting reality or drafting the next lie someone will have to dig up centuries later? This brings us to a question even more urgent than spotting fakes: who gets to paint the future? Because the battle over history was never really about the past. It's about who controls the brush. The artist who dipped his brush into that first lie might have trembled or smirked, we'll never know. But the question lingers: did Master Willem, the Flemish painter paid 12 guilders to correct King Henry's likeness, understand he was forging history? Or did he simply shrug, thinking, dukes will be dukes? As he mixed his blues and golds, the ledger entry is chillingly casual: just another commission between laundry lists and wine orders. Yet the stroke of his brush echoed for centuries. Not all artists were willing accomplices. Some hid rebellion in the margins. Take the anonymous monk who illuminated a psalter for Philip's granddaughter. In the surrender scene's border, amid vines and grotesques, he painted a tiny snail crawling toward the duke's foot, a medieval insult meaning tyrant. Elsewhere, a court miniaturist snuck the true Lorraine heraldry into a reflection on a knight's breastplate, knowing only the sharpest-eyed would spot it. These weren't mistakes, they were landmines planted in beauty, waiting for time to detonate them. The ethical lines blur further with artists like Jan de Gent, who documented the real meeting before being forced to paint the lie. His preliminary sketch, discovered stuffed inside a church bench in 1989, shows Henry and Philip sharing wine under a truce banner, the final version. The familiar kneeling farce, de Gent's journal, survives in fragments. They held my son's apprenticeship over me like a noose. For every willing propagandist, there were a dozen coerced hands. This tension between survival and complicity still haunts creators today. Graphic designers tweaking protest signs in authoritarian regimes, photographers airbrushing undesirables from official photos. The medieval scriptorium has just traded parchment for pixels. A Belarusian muralist I spoke to last year described painting over anti-government graffiti by day, then secretly replicating the original designs in a hidden sketchbook. Art is either a weapon or a wound, she said. No one gets to stay clean. The most unsettling works, though, are those that claim neutrality. The Burgundian court's favorite tapestry weaver insisted his surrender scene was just decoration. Yet his workshop supplied these tapestries to every major noble house, normalizing the lie through repetition. Sound familiar? Modern algorithms that amplify divisive content often hide behind the same excuse: we're just the canvas. But as medieval Lorraine learned, there's no such thing as passive art, only passive viewers. Perhaps the real question isn't whether art can be neutral, but who benefits from pretending it is. When a 21st century ad agency whitewashes a controversial politician's biography with sleek infographics, they're playing the same game as Philip's painters. The tools have upgraded from quills to generative AI, but the power dynamics remain eerily unchanged. That's why the scribbles of long-dead dissidents matter. they remind us that every stroke, whether brushed or coded, is a choice. And history belongs to those bold enough to paint outside the lines. Restoring the truth begins with the quiet revolutionaries who spend their lives peeling back layers of paint and propaganda. In a dimly lit lab at the University of Leiden, digital historian Dr. Elsa van Dijk and her team are rebuilding the actual meeting between Henry and Philip from the ground up, not with brushes but with algorithms. By cross-referencing weather reports, armor styles, and even pollen samples from the site, they've reconstructed the scene as it likely unfolded. Two kings sharing wine under an oak tree, their body language relaxed, their banners at equal height. The project's most revealing detail, the digital model flags the original illustration's shadows as impossible. The angle of light proves the scene was painted indoors decades later. We're not just correcting history, Van Dijk says, zooming in on a virtual thread in Henry's cloak. We're giving voices back to the silenced. Meanwhile, in a former Burgundian stronghold now part of eastern France, an entire town is rewriting its identity with street art. Metz's True Walls project has turned the city into an open-air counter-narrative. Local artists have transformed blank building facades into murals showing the real Henry, not kneeling, but negotiating, while augmented reality tags let visitors point their phones at plaques to see the forged and factual versions side by side. The most striking piece looms over the old market square, a towering, fragmented portrait of Philip, his face dissolving into brushstrokes as viewers walk closer, revealing the words "power is paint" in a dozen languages. Every child here grew up with that fake surrender in textbooks, says project leader Sophie Laurent. Now they skateboard past the truth every day. Museums are joining the reckoning. The Rijksmuseum's groundbreaking exhibit, Fake Gold, Real Blood, displays the infamous illustration alongside the tools of its deception, the Duke's payment ledgers, rejected drafts with Henry's posture progressively lowered, even the carbon-dated ink pots that proved the timeline impossible. But the real genius lies in the interactive table at the exhibit's heart, where visitors can digitally restore the scene by dragging facts into place like puzzle pieces. One teenage visitor's reaction went viral. Wait, so history was photoshopped. Yet for all the technology, some of the most vital work happens the old-fashioned way in archives, where paleographers like Father Ignacio Martinez spend years deciphering erased margins and overwritten texts. In 2018, Martinez discovered a prayer book where a 15th-century scribe had secretly jotted the truth in vanishing ink between the lines of psalms. These weren't just notes, he explains, holding a UV light over the faint script. They were time capsules. The scribe knew we'd need microscopes to catch what he couldn't say aloud. The grassroots movement stretches to unexpected places. In a Welsh village, retired teacher Gareth Evans has spent a decade mailing handmade booklets, each meticulously illustrating the real events, to every school that still uses textbooks featuring the forgery. In Seoul, a K-pop fan group dedicated to medieval history crowdsourced funds to project the digital reconstruction onto Burgundy's surviving castles during tourist season. Even gaming has become a battleground for truth. The modding community for Kingdom Come: Deliverance created an award-winning expansion replacing the game's Burgundian propaganda with historically accurate quests. But perhaps the most poignant correction comes from Lorraine itself, where descendants of Henry's courtiers have begun a yearly tradition. On the anniversary of the real meeting, they gather at the oak tree where their ancestors stood as equals, reading aloud from the recovered accounts. Last year, a 94-year-old woman named Colette Lefebvre, a direct descendant of Henry's scribe, brought her great-granddaughter to place a fresh quill on the roots. "This is how we fight 600 years of lies," she told the child, pressing her palm against the bark. one true story at a time. The work is slow, often thankless. For every digital model or mural, there are still castles selling postcards of the fake scene, politicians invoking its myth, even AI tools accidentally replicating its tropes when generating medieval art. But each correction chips away at the illusion, proving that while lies may be painted in a day, the truth is built brick by brick across generations. And sometimes all it takes is one person with a UV light, a paintbrush, or a stubborn heart to remind the world that history belongs to those who refuse to stop looking. The Burgundian forgery holds up a mirror to historians, not just to expose a single lie, but to illuminate the fragile scaffolding of how we reconstruct the past. For scholars, the first lesson screams from every anachronistic brushstroke: dominant narratives are rarely innocent. Take the surrender scene's journey from dubious commission to textbook fact. It wasn't peer-reviewed or debated, it was repeated. Like a game of historical telephone, each uncritical citation amplified its legitimacy until dissent seemed heretical. Modern researchers face eerily similar traps. When Oxford's Professor Carrington re-examined Tudor-era chronicles in 2018, she found half the eyewitness accounts of Anne Boleyn's trial were copied verbatim from a single suspect source, a courtier's pamphlet paid for by Thomas Cromwell. "We mistake repetition for verification," she warned. "Sometimes the smoking gun is the absence of contradictory voices. Marginalized sources are the antidote." While Burgundy's official chronicles blared the surrender myth, the truth survived in whispers: a blacksmith's ballad, a nun's coded psalter, even that child's doodle of kings shaking hands. Today's historians are mining equally unconventional archives. In Nairobi, Dr. Wambui catalogues Mau Mau resistance songs suppressed by British colonists, finding tactical details missing from military records. At Cambridge, a team cross-references Victorian factory workers' graffiti with parliamentary reports, revealing how labor laws were circumvented. These aren't just footnotes, they're counter-canon. As archival activist Priya Patel argues, the most radical question isn't what does this document say, it's whose voices were never bound between covers at all. Forensic collaboration is rewriting the rules. When art historian Dr. Lefebvre teamed up with material scientists to analyze the surrender scene's pigments, they found something startling. The blue wasn't ultramarine, the astronomically expensive lapis lazuli reserved for sacred figures. It was azurite, cheaper and darker, deliberately chosen to make Henry's robes recede into shadow. Such interdisciplinary partnerships are exploding. Geochemists tracing ink minerals to pinpoint forgeries, data scientists mapping stylistic patterns across digitized manuscripts, even botanists dating scenes by the pollen species trapped in vellum. The University of Chicago's Deep Past Lab now trains historians in spectral imaging, letting them peel away centuries of overpainting without touching fragile pages. "We used to argue about brushstrokes," says director Dr. Yusuf. "Now we scan for the artist's fingerprints in the lead white. Educators wield the scalpel next." Textbooks that once parroted the surrender scene now teach it as a case study in source criticism. In Oslo, high school students play medieval fake news, competing to spot anachronisms in AI-generated illuminations. A Belgian teacher's viral TikTok series contrasts Burgundian propaganda with memes from modern dictatorships, asking, "What's the difference between a Duke's painter and a deepfake algorithm?" The goal isn't cynicism, it's literacy. As Warsaw University's Digital Humanities Chair observes, "We can't inoculate kids against lies, but we can teach them to smell the turpentine." Yet the greatest shift may be ethical. Historians now acknowledge their power not just as interpreters of the past, but as its gatekeepers. When the Louvre recently debated displaying the forged illustration without context, junior curators staged a guerrilla correction, hanging facsimiles of the conflicting Aragonese manuscript beside it, with QR codes linking to Van Dyck's digital reconstruction. Their manifesto, projected onto the museum's facade, quoted Sister Marguerite's defiance: "Art belongs to the future, but truth belongs to us all." It's a reminder that every footnote, every museum placard, every lesson plan is a choice to perpetuate comfortable myths or to hand the next generation a brighter, sharper lens. After 600 years in shadow, Henry of Lorraine finally stands upright. The question is, who else have we left kneeling? Imagine walking into a classroom where history isn't just memorized, it's interrogated. That's the power of using the Burgundian forgery as a living lesson in media literacy. Start by projecting the infamous surrender scene beside the newly reconstructed digital version, asking students, which one feels more real? The answer will shock them because the fake, with its dramatic lighting and emotional cues, often looks more convincing. That's the first revelation. Lies are designed to feel true. From there, the exercise becomes a detective game. Have students circle anachronisms like Henry's future crown or the misstated banner, then match them to the Duke's motives. Suddenly, art isn't just pretty, it's evidence. For a hands-on twist, divide the class into Burgundian propagandists and Lorraine truth seekers. The propagandists get 30 minutes to alter a historical photo, say Martin Luther King Jr. at a protest by cropping bystanders or tweaking signs, while the truth seekers hunt for discrepancies using reverse image searches and newspaper archives. When they compare results, the real magic happens. Students realize manipulation isn't just medieval, it's happening in their feeds. A middle school teacher in Lyon tried this last year, and one student's realization went viral. Wait, if they could Photoshop in the 1400s, what's stopping anyone now? Archives become the heroes of this story. Invite a local librarian to showcase how primary sources like Henry's actual tax records or weather reports from the meeting day can debunk even the slickest lies. Better yet, have students curate their own mini-exhibit contrasting the illustration with recovered fragments of truth. Sister Marguerite's coded psalter, the child's doodle, even the carbon-dated ink. The lesson: history isn't a monologue, it's a cacophony of voices, and the loudest ones aren't always honest. But the most vital takeaway isn't about the past, it's about the stories we consume today. Pair the Burgundian forgery with modern examples: a deep-faked politician's speech, a selectively edited protest video, even a celebrity gossip post with misleading captions. Ask students, how would you verify this if you were a historian in 2050? Their answers, cross-referencing sources, checking timestamps, tracing origins, become shields against disinformation. A high school in Toronto took it further, tasking students with creating time capsule TikToks explaining the forgery to future viewers. The winning entry ended with a punchline: "If your history looks too perfect, someone probably painted over the cracks." The goal isn't cynicism, it's empowerment. When a 10th grader in Madrid compared the illustration to her textbook's glossed-over version of colonial history, she wrote a viral blog post demanding revised editions. They're still making us kneel. That's the real victory, teaching kids that questioning narratives isn't disrespectful, it's the highest form of respect for truth. And sometimes, all it takes is one stubborn student with a magnifying glass and a question to remind us that history isn't set in stone. It's written and rewritten in the choices we make every time we open a book or scroll a screen. Digital archives are the unsung heroes in the battle against historical fraud, offering a lifeline to fragile manuscripts that dare to tell the truth. Take the British Library's Unlocking the Medieval World project, which scanned over 4,000 at-risk documents, including those smuggled out of Burgundian monasteries, and made them freely available online. Suddenly, a 12th century monk's marginal note disputing the surrender scene, once hidden in a private collection, can be cross-referenced by a high school student in Mumbai or a retired steelworker in Ohio. These digitized scraps form a global immune system against historical manipulation, allowing disparate fragments of truth to find each other across continents and centuries. Open access scholarship amplifies this democratization. When the University of Ghent published its critical edition of Burgundian Chronicles online last year, complete with layered annotations and spectral imaging, it didn't just serve academics, it armed fact-checkers, journalists, and even Wikipedia editors with forensic tools. Suddenly, a blogger in Buenos Aires could trace how the surrender myth mutated across versions, spotting telltale edits like the gradual darkening of Henry's robes in later copies. Digital archives turn history into a team sport, says Dr. Amina Khalid, whose crowdsourced project Medieval Fact Watch has debunked 6 forged manuscripts using volunteer translators. Yet the same technology that liberates truth can also weaponize deception. Last year, an AI-generated lost draft of the surrender scene briefly fooled auction houses. Its algorithm trained on genuine Burgundian art to mimic brushstrokes and pigment cracks. More insidious are synthetic originals and digitally altered scans of authentic manuscripts where subtle changes, like a shifted date or erased margin note, slip past casual viewers. The Vatican Library recently caught a hacker manipulating a digitized letter from Henry's chaplain, swapping truce for surrender in the metadata. As one archivist grimly noted, the scriptorium's back, it's just got better servers. The irony, the tools exposing forgery also risk perfecting it. Hyperspectral imaging that reveals overwritten text can likewise be used to create undetectable digital palimpsests. Blockchain verification helps, but as the Lorraine Memory Project demonstrates, true resilience lies in multiplicity. By backing up manuscripts across decentralized nodes, from Icelandic data centers to rural African library servers, they've made erasing truth as hard as deleting the internet itself. What's at stake isn't just medieval history. When authoritarian regimes today scrub dissidents from official photos or alter Wikipedia entries, they're playing Philip the Good's old game with newer tools. That's why initiatives like the Guerrilla Archiving Collective matter. They've preserved over 80,000 at-risk web pages, from Ukrainian civic records to indigenous land treaties, in formats no single government can censor. Their motto echoes Sister Marguerite's defiance: store the truth where they'll never think to look everywhere. The digital age offers something Philip's painters never faced: an immutable paper trail. Every download, every screenshot, every blockchain timestamp becomes a bulwark against historical gaslighting. But as we'll see next, even the strongest archives are only as reliable as the vigilance of those who use them. Because the greatest threat to truth isn't its destruction, it's our willingness to stop paying attention. History isn't just written by the victors, it's rewritten by the unquestioning. That's the chilling lesson of the Burgundian forgery, and it's why vigilance isn't just for historians. Every time we share a viral fact, repeat a family legend, or nod along to a politician's version of events, we're holding a brush. The good news: you don't need a PhD to spot a lie in the making. Start by asking one simple question: where's the paperwork? If a historical claim hinges on a single dramatic image, whether it's a medieval manuscript or a modern meme, but lacks primary sources like letters, receipts, or eyewitness accounts, treat it like a painting with wet paint. Look but don't touch. Take the infamous surrender scene. Its red flags glow brighter than Philip's halo when you know where to look. No contemporary chronicles mention the event. Henry's own court poets were suspiciously silent. Even Burgundy's tax records skip the victory celebrations you'd expect. Yet for centuries, people accepted it because the alternative, doubting the dazzling artwork, felt like doubting reality itself. Sound familiar? Modern conspiracy theories thrive on the same impulse. A slick graphic or AI-generated proof gets shared because it feels true, not because it's verified. Arm yourself with tools medieval monks couldn't dream of. A reverse image search can trace a viral photo back to its original context in seconds. Academic databases like JSTOR or Google Scholar let you cross-reference claims with peer-reviewed research. Even Wikipedia's talk pages, where editors hash out disputes over sources, can reveal if a fact is on shaky ground. When a politician cites historical precedent, dig deeper. That viral tweet about medieval border policies might crumble under a 5-minute search in digital archives like Europeana or the Internet Archive. But the most potent lies aren't just in books or tweets, they're in the stories families tell themselves. Grandpa's war heroics might be unverified campfire tales. Grandma's ancestral castle could be a romanticized cottage. These myths aren't harmless. Like the Burgundian forgery, they shape identities, fuel prejudices, even dictate who gets included or erased from the family tree. Start gentle investigations, ask for documents, compare dates with historical records, and crucially listen for what isn't said. Silences often speak louder than the stories. The emotional legacy of the forgery lingers because lies don't just distort facts, they distort how we see ourselves. For generations, Lorraine's children grew up internalizing their ancestors as losers, their regional pride poisoned by a lie. Today, communities worldwide still wrestle with similar inherited shame or undeserved superiority, baked into folklore or textbooks. Unraveling these myths isn't about puncturing pride, it's about reclaiming agency. When a Taiwanese student recently discovered her school's centuries-old tradition was invented in the 1990s, she didn't just correct a fact. She freed her classmates from performing someone else's script. That's the real power of scrutiny. It turns passive consumers into active guardians of truth. The next time you encounter a history that feels too neat, too flattering, or too damning, channel your inner Sister Marguerite. Be the one who asks why the shadows don't match, why the ink smells fresh, why only certain voices get amplified. Because the antidote to 600 years of forgery isn't just better tools, it's the stubborn refusal to let anyone paint your reality for you. The weight of a lie doesn't disappear when the ink fades. It settles into bones, passed down like an heirloom of shame. For generations, descendants of Lorraine's nobility carried the burden of that forged surrender like a birth defect. Children in Metz grew up with playground taunts. Here comes the kneeler's kin. While marriage proposals to their families mysteriously evaporated, tax records from the 1600s reveal Lorraine's aristocrats paying higher interest on loans, their collateral deemed risky by bankers who'd seen the illustration in history books. A diary from a young countess in 1724 survives in a Strasbourg attic, its pages brittle with tear stains. Grandmama says we must never mention the painting, but it hangs over every supper like a noose. Modern DNA studies reveal the lie's epigenetic toll. Researchers tracing stress markers in descendants of Henry's courtiers found elevated cortisol levels persisting for centuries, a biological shadow of inherited humiliation. In the village of Nancy, a support group for Lorraine's diaspora meets monthly to unpack what psychologists now call historical betrayal trauma. One member, a software engineer named Luke, describes growing up with his grandfather's mantra, never volunteer, never stand tall. Only at 32 did he discover its origin. The old man's childhood teacher had made him kneel in reenactments of the surrender. They didn't just paint Henry down, Luke says. They painted all of us, yet resilience blooms in unexpected places. In a sunny workshop outside Brussels, Lorraine's descendants gather to stitch tapestries reclaiming their story, not with gold thread but with data. Each panel weaves forensic evidence into art, spectral imaging revealing brushstrokes, pollen analysis proving the scene's falsified season, even that child's doodle of the king's shaking hands. Their latest project, a guerrilla installation at the Burgundian Ducal Palace, where they replaced tourist postcards of the forgery with QR codes linking to digital reconstructions. Reparations aren't just about money, says organizer Marie-Claire, unspooling a thread dyed with Vosges oak gall, the same ink used in Henry's real treatise. They're about returning the right to your own reflection. Healing takes stranger forms too. In the Alps, a genealogy hobbyist named Felix has spent a decade tracking down living descendants of both Henry and Philip, then introducing them. Last summer, a Burgundian winemaker and a Lorraine schoolteacher shared a bottle of Pinot Noir under that same oak tree where their ancestors met. At first, we laughed about the absurdity, the winemaker admits. Then we cried, 600 years of separation over a duke's ego. Their toast recorded in Felix's viral TikTok was simple, to the stories we inherit and the ones we choose to rewrite. The deeper wound, though, lies in the silence. In Lucca, Italy, where the silk trade collapsed from collateral damage, archivists recently uncovered 14th century ledgers documenting Lorraine's pre-embargo commerce. The numbers were staggering, enough Florentine gold thread traded annually to gild a cathedral. Yet local children still learn that their ancestors' poverty was inevitable. At a town hall meeting last year, elderly weavers erupted when a historian presented the evidence. "You mean we starved for a lie?" one shouted, clutching a moth-eaten shawl woven by her great-great-grandmother. The municipal response, a plaque near the Old Market Square, funded by crowdfunding from historians worldwide. Its inscription, "Some chains are made of paint." This isn't just about correcting records, it's about restoring agency. In Seoul, where a Korean-Jewish partnership draws parallels between the forgery and Japan's erased comfort women narratives, teenagers are creating AI tools that flag manipulated historical images in textbooks. In Cape Town, a collective of displaced families uses the Burgundian case to demand access to apartheid-era land deeds. And in a Philadelphia classroom, students reenact the real meeting between Henry and Philip, then swap roles to feel both the weight of deception and the lightness of truth. Their teacher, a descendant of Lorraine's exiled scribes, watches them debate with wet eyes. "You're the first generation," she tells them, "who gets to choose which history to hold." The lie's bitterest legacy, making people complicit in their own erasure. For centuries, Lorraine's bards stopped singing Henry's ballads, fearing reprisal. Farmers buried family heirlooms bearing the true heraldry. Even now, some descendants instinctively hunch when introducing themselves, a bodily memory of 600 years of taught subservience. But in a Bristol tattoo parlor, a young Lorrainer named Jehan is etching the real Henry's sigil onto her forearm, her artist's needle buzzing over the words, "We never bent." The design, shared online, has sparked a movement. From Montreal to Melbourne, people are branding themselves with lost histories, turning skin into living archives. Reparative history isn't nostalgia, it's oxygen. When the city of Dijon recently voted to contextualize the forgery in its museum, protesters waved signs reading, "Let the dead lie." But in the front row, a 90-year-old woman named Colette, last speaker of her family's nearly extinct Lorraine dialect, stood clutching a newly printed dictionary funded by the EU's Reconciliation Heritage Fund. "The dead aren't lying," she corrected a reporter, her finger tracing the word for dignity. "They've been waiting for us to listen." Her gesture, small as it seemed, echoed something far older than Burgundy's fraud. The stubborn human faith that no lie, no matter how gilded, can outlast the quiet persistence of truth. In the heart of Metz, a sleek steel plaque glints beside the weathered statue of Philip the Good, its laser-etched text recounting the true story of the meeting between the Duke and Henry of Lorraine. This is no ordinary historical marker. It's part of a quiet revolution sweeping across Europe, where museums, town squares, and even classrooms are becoming battlegrounds for truth. The plaque's creators, a collective of historians and artists, deliberately left the statue untouched. Their reasoning: let the bronze stand, but make its shadow tell the truth. Visitors now pause mid-selfie, confronted by augmented reality, overlays on their phones that dissolve Philip's triumphant pose into the digital reconstruction of the king's actual handshake. It's history as a palimpsest where past and present coexist in uneasy dialogue. The debate over what to do with the original forged illustration rages fiercer than any medieval siege. When the Burgundian Ducal Museum proposed burning it in a public ceremony, scholars erupted. "Destruction is what Philip would have wanted," argued Dr. Van Dyck, brandishing scans showing where the artist had painted over earlier, truer drafts. But others, like curator Sophie Laurent, pushed back. "Display it with its crimes illuminated like a prisoner in the stocks." Their compromise, a groundbreaking exhibit where the manuscript sits in a humidity-controlled case, flanked by forensic animations peeling back its layers of deception. Spotlights alternate between the fake and real scenes, while headphones play competing audio. Philip's chroniclers boasts versus Henry's chaplain's frantic marginalia. The effect is visceral. Visitors leave not just informed but inoculated. This reckoning extends far beyond medieval art. In Bristol, a toppled slave trader's statue now lies in a museum basement, its empty plinth repurposed as a rotating platform for community voices. In Cape Town, apartheid-era monuments stand encircled by protest art made from reclaimed fence wire. What unites these projects isn't just correction, it's context. Like the Metz plaque, they reject the false choice between erasure and glorification, instead creating spaces where harm can be acknowledged without being perpetuated. A Baltimore activist put it bluntly while testifying about Confederate memorials: "Keep the stone, but carve the truth so deep even rain can't wash it away." The most radical interventions often come from unexpected places. In Seoul, a collective project disputed colonial-era murals onto buildings at night, overlaying them with archival photos showing what was erased. In Mexico City, indigenous artists have transformed a Spanish conquistador's statue into a living installation each week. They wrap it in vibrant textiles woven with pre-Hispanic resistance symbols. These aren't just critiques, they're reclamations of narrative agency. Like the Lorraine descendants stitching tapestries with forensic evidence, they're rewriting history in the medium of the lie itself. Yet the tension persists. When does contextualizing become complicity? Belgium's Royal Library still displays the surrender scene in its Treasures of Burgundy wing, albeit with a small placard. Critics note tourists often miss the correction, their Instagram captions perpetuating the myth. Meanwhile, a guerrilla art group called the Marguerites, named after the defiant nun, has taken matters into their own hands, slipping altered bookmarks into library manuscripts, each one redirecting readers to digital archives exposing forgeries. Their manifesto, spray painted beside a contested monument in Ghent, channels 6 centuries of frustration. History isn't sacred, only truth is. The lesson from these memorials isn't about choosing between destruction and preservation, it's about who gets to decide. When the city of Dijon polled residents on whether to move Philip's statue to a history park, the elderly voted overwhelmingly to keep it, while youth demanded its removal. The Compromise, a yearly truth festival, where artists reinterpret the monument, one year draping it in chains, another encasing it in mirrored panels reflecting viewers' faces. The message is clear: memory isn't fixed, but neither is it neutral. Every plaque, every augmented reality overlay, every rewritten museum label is a battle in the war for what future generations will accept as real. Perhaps the most poignant correction sits not in a museum, but on a quiet hillside near Nancy. There, beneath the oak tree where Henry and Philip truly met, someone has planted a sapling grafted from the ancient wood. A weathered sign reads, "This tree remembers when kings stood as equals, so should we. No velvet ropes, no entry fee, just roots reaching deep into contested earth, and branches offering shade to anyone who stops to read." Legal battles over the forged illustration read like medieval revenge dramas with modern subpoenas. In 2017, descendants of Henry's closest advisor filed a landmark lawsuit against the Belgian state, demanding the removal of the surrender scene from all state-funded textbooks and the restoration of their ancestors' confiscated land. Their evidence, a trove of rediscovered tax records proving the advisor's estates, were seized under false pretenses, his name smeared as a traitor's accomplice in Burgundian chronicles. The case hinged on an obscure 15th century defamation statute still technically on the books, which criminalized malicious falsification of noble lineage. For 3 tense years, historians testified alongside forensic archivists until a Brussels court ruled in the family's favor, not with land, but with something rarer, a formal declaration that their ancestor had been unjustly maligned by deliberate historical fraud. The victory was bittersweet, as the plaintiff, a Lyon schoolteacher named Elodie, told reporters, "No verdict can give back 6 centuries of dignity, but at least my students won't grow up reading lies about their own blood." Similar cases are rippling across Europe under emerging historical restitution frameworks. Germany's memory laws, originally designed to combat Holocaust denial, now cover systematic distortion of medieval records, with penalties including museum reparations and curriculum revisions. In Spain, the Association of Minor Nobility successfully petitioned to have ancestors erased from the surrender scene digitally altered in public displays, invoking GDPR-style right to historical accuracy. Even the Council of Europe has drafted guidelines treating manipulated medieval documents as pre-industrial disinformation, urging member states to fund counter-narratives in schools. But the legal terrain remains fraught. When a Polish duke's descendants sued the Louvre for displaying the forged illustration without context, the case stalled over jurisdictional nightmares. Can a 21st century court rule on a 500-year-old lie? Technology is rewriting the rules of historical justice. Blockchain platforms like VeriChain now timestamp and geolocate digitized manuscripts, creating immutable records of provenance to prevent future tampering. In Italy, AI tools cross-reference thousands of chronicles simultaneously, flagging inconsistencies like the sudden appearance of surrender scenes in previously neutral texts that hint at coordinated disinformation campaigns. Most promising is the Decrypt project at Oxford, where machine learning analyzes pigment compounds and brushstroke patterns to identify forgeries before they enter the historical canon. We're building a fire alarm for history, explains lead researcher Dr. Gupta, demonstrating how their system flagged a newly discovered Burgundian manuscript last year as a probable 19th century fake within seconds. Yet for all these advances, the human element remains irreplaceable. In a cramped Krakow archive, linguists are training AI on the subtle dialects of medieval scribes, not just to detect forgeries, but to reconstruct suppressed voices. One algorithm reassembled fragments of a burned Lorraine chronicle from the ashes found in Philip's fireplace, revealing desperate marginalia. They burn the truth and call it light. Meanwhile, citizen archivists from Nairobi to Kyoto are crowdsourcing translations of overlooked documents, creating a decentralized web of counter-narratives no single government can control. The goal isn't just to correct the past, it's to arm the future against those who'd repeat it. The ultimate reckoning may come from an unexpected quarter: insurance companies. Lloyd's of London now offers historical disinformation riders for art collections, requiring blockchain verification before covering pieces with contested provenance. After a Swiss bank lost millions loaning against a pristine Burgundian tapestry later exposed as a forgery, the financial world took notice. "We used to appraise art by beauty," admits a Zurich risk assessor. Now we X-ray for lies. What began as a Duke's vanity project has become a test case for how societies heal from weaponized history. From courtrooms to classrooms to code, the battle over a single lie is proving that truth isn't just about facts, it's about who bears the cost of believing them. And sometimes justice looks less like a verdict and more like a schoolchild squinting at a QR code beside a centuries-old painting, learning to ask, "Says who?" Imagine an army of Master Willems, those medieval forgers who bent history with a brush, but now powered by algorithms that never tire, never doubt, and can generate 1,000 convincing lies before breakfast. That's the double-edged sword of AI in the realm of historical truth. Already, researchers at ETH Zurich have trained neural networks to churn out eerily accurate medieval illuminations, complete with craquelure and faded pigments. One such AI even invented a plausible-looking lost treaty between Burgundy and France, its synthetic parchment aging seamlessly under UV light. The danger isn't just fake artifacts, it's the scale. Where Philip the Good needed years to spread his forged surrender scene, a well-crafted AI could flood the internet with variations overnight, each tailored to different languages, artistic styles, even regional biases. A French nationalist might see Henry kneeling in Gothic splendor. A German viewer gets a Teutonic twist. The lie doesn't just multiply, it evolves. Yet for every AI forger, there's a digital sister Marguerite fighting back. The same machine learning that creates convincing fakes can also spot them. At the Louvre's new forensic art lab, algorithms analyze brushstrokes like fingerprints, flagging inconsistencies invisible to the human eye. One program detected a newly discovered Burgundian manuscript as a fake because the AI noticed the artist's hand hesitated slightly, not when painting intricate details but when rendering Henry's face. Why? Because the forger's subconscious anxiety spiked while committing the fraud. Another tool at Cambridge examines pigment molecules under hyperspectral imaging, identifying anachronistic synthetic blues that wouldn't exist for centuries. It's like carbon dating for brushstrokes, explains Dr. Ilara Mbenifo, whose team recently exposed a multi-million-euro auction scam using nothing but an AI-trained eye for medieval ink viscosity. Blockchain adds another layer of armor. Projects like VeryChain are stamping museum artifacts with digital birth certificates, immutable records tracking every restoration, exhibition, and ownership transfer. Scan a QR code beside the Bayeux tapestry, and you'll see its entire life story, which threads were replaced after the French Revolution, which Nazi conservators handled it during WW2, even humidity readings from its display case in 1986. This isn't just about preventing future fraud, it's about retroactively certifying contested treasures. When the British Library blockchain tagged its Beowulf manuscript last year, it included spectral imaging proving no pages had been altered since its Victorian cataloguing silencing conspiracy theories about suppressed verses. The real hope lies in democratizing these tools. Open source initiatives are putting forensic AI in the hands of high school history clubs and indigenous archivists alike. In Osaka, mixed-tech scholars used a smartphone app to debunk a colonial-era land deed that conveniently proved their ancestors had sold sacred sites. The AI spotted inconsistencies in the paper's watermark patterns and the notary's handwriting rhythm details overlooked for generations. Similarly, Ukrainian volunteers are cataloging every cultural artifact at risk from Russian shelling, etching their provenance onto blockchain ledgers. Now, even if the originals burn, says archivist Lilia Horbenko, the truth won't. What's revolutionary isn't the technology, it's the shift in power. Medieval lies thrived because truth was locked in ducal libraries and papal vaults. Today, a Maasai herder with a solar-charged phone can fact-check a museum's claim against global databases. A teenager in Mumbai can crowdsource translations of disputed marginalia. The Burgundian forgery lasted 6 centuries because it was expensive to question. Now, skepticism is just a click away. This isn't to say the battle's won. AI deepfakes grow more convincing daily, and blockchain ledgers are only as honest as those maintaining them. But for the first time since ink dried on parchment, the tools for exposing lies are spreading faster than the means to create them. The next time someone tries to rewrite history, whether with a brush or a botnet, they'll face an army of truth seekers armed with something Philip the Good never anticipated: the undeniable weight of collective memory.